Welcome back to Inside City Hall, where we've been talking about the debate about the mayor's plan to change how students get into the city's elite high schools. Joining me now is a special panel. Richard Bury is a Stuyvesant alum and the Chief of Policy and Public Affairs at the KIPP Foundation. He previously served as deputy mayor in the de Blasio administration, where he oversaw the rollout of the universal pre-K program. Christina Alfonso also graduated from Stuyvesant and currently serves on the Alumni Association as the co-chair of the Diversity Committee. And David Lee is a Brooklyn Tech alum. He's a member of the Chinese American Citizens Alliance of Greater New York. Thank you all for being here. Good to see everybody. And I want to start with you, Richard. Did you have anything to do with the shaping of the mayor's thinking or the actual plan that he rolled out over the last few days?
No, I didn't have anything to do with it. Certainly over the last 4 years, I had many conversations with the mayor and other leaders in City Hall about the need for change. And so I was part of some informal conversations, but didn't have a direct role in the policy.
Gotcha. Okay, well, look, let's put up the mayor's plan and look at some of the highlights of it. We've been talking about this all night. What he's calling for is to have the state legislature support elimination of the SHSAT exam within 3 years. Top performers would be determined by a combination of grades and 7th grade state math and ELA exams. He wants to set aside 20% of seats for low-income students who just missed the test cutoff, and by 2021, completely eliminate the exam and reserve most or nearly all of the seats for the top 7% of students from each middle school. So now I know there are people who agree or disagree with most or all of it, as well as the method by which this was all compiled. And as alums, I wanted to hear from you. We'll start with you, David Lee. Your group was one of the ones that held the demonstration at City Hall, right?
That's right. The community objects to it, not only on the basis of being the Asian community, but as the alumni of the schools object to it, because the proposal really will devastate and change the nature of the specialized high school. These high schools are really meant for the top 2 to 5% of the city's students in the city. That's a very unique purpose. It has a very unique purpose. They're trying to develop STEM engineers. With his proposal, if the bill were to go through, it would become more or less an average city school. And we have plenty of those. And the way it was put through on a Friday night, without any discussion with the biggest stakeholders at these schools, which happen to be Asian Americans, without any discussion with them, and to put this through and to have a vote in the committee on Wednesday, it just devastated the community, and the community is up in arms in it.
Well, tell me about your experience as an alum. When you were at the school, if there were, I don't know, let's call it 15% of the students who maybe weren't as good test takers, maybe weren't as sharp as some of the other students. Would it have harmed your experience, do you think?
Well, when I went to the school in 1974, I graduated in 1978 from Brooklyn Tech. In fact, my graduating class, and I just went to my homecoming, was actually 50% black and Hispanic, a majority. I was the minority at the school. I had the identity issues, although I didn't, because we didn't realize back then, everybody got in through taking the test. And at my homecoming, I made it a point to speak with my fellow alum. And they all told me that they had no test prep. Their pathway was through honors classes and gifted and talent programs. And that was a pipeline. And they didn't realize that today in New York City, that pipeline has been shut off. And that is why the Asians, over the last 18 years, realizing that the public school system is no longer as rigorous as it once was, they turned to test prep, which, yes, originates from their countries. So that was their solution. And it's very unfortunate that the black and Hispanic community and underrepresented communities could not follow that. And we believe, personally, I believe, there's a huge crisis in New York City for the black and Hispanic community. Statistics show in the state assessment test, 2% of black students are proficient in math. That is a devastating number, and I just feel ashamed about it.
And so, Christina, in the lack of a pipeline, what do you think should be done? What do you think of the mayor's proposal? So 2 things. I think I speak on behalf of myself and also many alumni when I say that we believe in diversity, we believe in equity, and we think that having one test to gain entrance into these schools is something that's necessary and something that's fair.
We all agree that it's disgraceful that there, were 10 black students in the entering class at Stuyvesant, but that's more of a reflection on the educational inequities that stem far before the students even enter the 8th grade. I think the most important thing is to be able to restore the pipeline to the specialized high schools, which used to be in existence and has been broken, as David mentioned. There are no more SP and IGC classes, which are essentially enrichment classes that existed in every neighborhood school. So, back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, when you speak to many alumni who graduated during these years, they'll tell you that they came from these programs, they received enriched coursework, and that enabled them to do well on the test. So I think that the important thing is to focus on either restoring these classes to neighborhood schools, or it could be as simple as just having algebra for 8th grade students.
Is it, in your opinion, did those programs that enable people to sort of have more of a realistic chance of passing this test, did they fall away by accident? Did somebody forget to do it, or is it deliberate?
I believe this happened in the late 90s where, there were changes to the public school system and, these programs in local junior high schools were done away with and instead restructured to have what we now know as gifted and talented elementary and middle schools. And many of these schools have become feeder schools to the specialized high schools. Mm-hmm. So, when you look at the situation we have now, which is, 21% of middle schools taking up the seats of, 50% of the students in the specialized high schools. I mean, this is something that, we recognize as an issue we want to change, but the issue is not about taking away the test. The issue is about...
See, this is what I don't understand. Is why is it the test that can't change? Like, the whole rest of the system, deeply flawed, unfair, people are buying advantages on the outside in the private market, but like the one gateway, that test, that's the thing that I can't understand, Richard, why alums seem to think that, like, we can't let go of that.
Errol, this is the heart of the problem. So just to step back for a second, you have to look at what's happening right now and decide if it makes sense to you. Do you really believe, even with the challenging public school system that we have, that there are only 500 black and Latino students in this entire city who can do the work at schools like Stuyvesant, Science, and Tech? That is not true. You hit the nail right on the head. I want to go back to the way the proposed plan would work. Admission would be driven basically by two factors: whether you were in the top of your class in core subjects, English, math, science, and two, whether you perform extremely well on a test, a standardized test which in fact is taken by more students, and unlike the specialized high school admissions test, is actually connected to the curriculum that students should have been learning for the last 4 years. So why do we act like the specialized high school admissions test was handed down by Moses with the 10 Commandments? It is a test made by people to do a job. That test is not doing its job. In civil rights law, there's a concept of adverse impact, right, using employment law and other factors. If you have a test that has a disparate impact, you have to prove that there's a real reason for that test. No one has ever been explained to me why it is that the specialized high school admissions test allegedly does a better job of deciding who's qualified and who's prepared for these schools, as opposed to the state standardized tests that students should be prepared for during middle school and how well they perform against their peers in school. We are doing a disservice to everyone. We're doing a disservice to the students in those schools now who don't get to go to schools with a diverse set of students. Probably the most important skill that you need for success in college and in life, the ability to work with people who are unlike you. That was my experience at Stuyvesant. We're doing a disservice to the students, of course, who don't get in, but we're doing a disservice to the city because the city is then bereft of this opportunity to have leaders who are trained to work in diverse communities and to drive change forward.
Well, let me ask any of you, just in your experience in these schools, were there students who washed out, who just, for whatever reason, couldn't hack the work, didn't belong there? Was it a horrible experience?
Yes, it was. When I went to school, it was the old adage: you look to your left, look to your right. In 3 years, and at the end of this year, one of you will not be here. Mm-hmm. Why the test? Why do we have to have a test? There are a lot of issues where, especially in this legislation, we're worried about, well, what happens if this? What happens if that? When you have a test like this, there are no issues, there are no questions. You do well on the test and you get in. There's no who your father is. There is no, this is true. The Bronx Science,
it's the red herring, though.
The Bronx Science
what's being proposed is a test. It's a standardized test. It's a red herring.
There's a very high correlation.
Proposal doesn't have to do with who your father is. That's not what this proposal does. I just think you're arguing against something that's not proposed.
It's an open-ended proposal. It says whatever the chancellor and whatever else the chancellor believes to be appropriate. So it is open-ended. But you know, even the Bronx Science principal has in the past has been offered bribes to have students get into these schools. Again, it's just the fact that Brooklyn Tech for 30 years was majority black and Hispanic, and now that for the last 18 years is majority Asian, and for the first 50 years was white, under the same admission criteria. This dispels the claim that the test is somehow responsible for
But you yourself mentioned that there is this enormous test prep industry that's out there. I mean, these tutoring sessions, right? I imagine many of your classmates did that before they took the test, right? I mean, I know of people who did this for years. I mean, hundreds of hours of preparation.
Some do, some don't.
I mean, I think test prep is important. I think that it helps students. I think it especially helps students who are on the cusp. But I think what's most important is making sure that all students in New York City, in every neighborhood, have access to an equal and excellent education. And then they will have a better chance of doing well on this test and earning a seat at the specialized high schools. I think that there's a lot that can be done before the mayor tries to implement something like this to try to ensure that these students have a better access to a better education, such as something I was trying to speak to before, you know, offering students enrichment, having a program, you know, having something like the DREAM program, but expanded, which, you know, which finds and nurtures talent in students from districts and junior high schools that are underrepresented in the specialized schools. We want to rebuild the pipeline that has been broken, and I believe that if we work on rebuilding the pipeline, the results are going to look different.
I as an advocate, I advocated personally for $15 million. Well, it ended up being a $15 million program for what we call test prep. I would call it test enrichment for underrepresented communities, other than my own.
Yes.
And this is how much we, as the Asian community, believes in diversity, and we want inclusion. And as again, that's if you say our community has unfair test prep advantages, we want to have that go out to other communities.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for a very enlightening discussion. We're at the beginning of this, so I'm sure we'll talk again. Thanks so much for coming by tonight. We're going to take a short break here.